First of all, I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you all because just listening to the idea of progressive Democrats restores a little hope in my heart because it's been a pretty painful struggle in this state because we find ourselves in a position where the leadership that is most aggressive in attacking our union and other public employee unions are the Democrats. So it's nice to have a bigger vision of what Democrats could be. I want to start by giving a little bit of basic background, and I see a number of familiar faces, so I apologize if I'm repeating stuff you already know, but just real quickly, AFSCME actually was born in Wisconsin in the early 30s. We got our charter from the AFL in 1936, and then here in Illinois we really started up in 46 with organizing, and it was organizing both state employees and little locals, but also municipal employees, city employees. They would create their own locals, but they were really struggling in an uphill battle until we were able to get in legislation public employees' right to union bargaining, and that really launched an organizing period that meant that what we have today, about 40,000 state employees and another 35,000 folks who are members who work for a range of governments, but also in some cases work for private agencies that rely heavily on state funding. So that's kind of just a quick overview. And then in terms of our structure, the Council 31 is kind of the umbrella organization for hundreds of locals, and those locals really represent kind of the heart of the organization. That's where leadership is elected, that's where stewards come from, that's where trainings happen. And one of the remarkable things is given how many locals we have representing state employees, we have been committed to making sure that all of the locals have people engaged in the bargaining process. So I admit, before I started at AFSCME, I had this image of a bargaining room where you had like 5 leaders on one side and 5 on the other. Our bargaining committee is 250 people, and they are there 2-3 days at a time, going through the contract, going through the language, stopping, caucusing, asking questions. So it's really a level of engagement that makes a huge difference, not only during the negotiating process, but then when people go back, when they need to explain to their local why this changed or why people are considering this concession, they were there. They were part of the conversation. They can do a better job of describing to people what's going on. So that's just a real quick overview of Council 31 and Illinois AFSCME. Now I want to talk a little bit about the fight we're in now. And it's actually a fight kind of on 3 fronts at least. One fight is on pensions, and people have mentioned that before. And I have to say that that has been both a very grinding experience because we never have a real victory in that discussion. All we have is putting off the most awful. So we are facing a situation where, because there's been about 30 years of underfunding of pensions, the governor and the Democratic leadership, along with Republicans, want to revamp the pension system and basically make employees pay for the fact that the legislator, the employer, failed to pay year after year. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a guy named Ralph Martiri, but he says legislators use the pension fund kind of like a credit card. It meant that they didn't have to raise taxes, but they could do all these very popular services. That's not possible anymore, so that's why things came to kind of a screeching halt. but the fact remains that every single state employee made a payment into the pension fund, and that was consistent. And where it fell down was on this side of the state not paying in adequately and now finding that we're seriously underfunded. We've done a great job battling back, and it's actually been as a result of the fact that the major unions involved have all come together. So there is a coalition called We Are Illinois, and that coalition has brought together all of the major groups, the Illinois Education Association, the Illinois Federation of Teachers, AFSCME, SEIU, all of them working together and coordinating all of the campaigning that's happening, not only in terms of lobbying in Springfield, but also coordinating efforts to do outreach, to do educational events around the state, to do surveys and get a sense of what the public view is. And one of the things that gave us a little hope is that contrary to what you might think if you relied on the Tribune for all of your information, the general public is surprisingly sympathetic. So most of them do respond very positively to statements about the state's need to treat seriously their obligation to people who have retired and are relying on pensions for their day-to-day expenses. So working together through We Are One Illinois, we have made tremendous progress. It is still very much in the trenches. The Illinois Senate President Cullerton has a bill out that is kind of a Frankenstein bill that's put together two bad bills with multiple choice, I guess, to the Supreme Court to see if either is constitutional. And they're kind of trying to bulldoze this thing through. And once again, I think it's going to mean that public employees across the state are going to have to battle to try and get a sensible solution. Now, one thing we have done is put a number of proposals on the table. We recognize that it doesn't do anybody any good to just stonewall and say no changes at all. So we have proposed that employees would pay an additional 2% in, but the legislature kind of dismissed, and the governor kind of dismissed that quickly. We're hoping that by having a summit and bringing together legislative leaders, the governor, etc., we can start to have a serious discussion in which we recognize that there will need to be some sacrifice on the part of public employees. Our argument is it should not be all on the back of public employees. The second fight that we've had most recently was initiated by the governor 2 years ago. He introduced a bill that would strip union rights from about 2,000 public employees, state employees. And that bill we've managed to beat back several times, but unfortunately just last month in the session, the lame duck session, it did finally pass the Senate. It had earlier passed the House, and we now have a bill on the governor's table that he can sign and basically move 2,000 people out of the unions that they belong to and back to the mercy of the government in terms of what their rights, what their power, and what their salary is going to be. So that was a frustrating experience and kind of, to me, an eye-opening experience, because it was very, very clearly about collective bargaining rights and about the leadership from the governor on down not respecting those rights and being willing to pass legislation that really curtailed those rights. And then the final battle that is heating up every day, it feels like, is a battle for contract. We've been negotiating for about a year now for a contract that covers 40,000 state employees. And let me just pause for a minute, because there have been a number of times when I've spoken to people, and I think their image of a state employee is kind of a faceless bureaucrat or the person that drives you crazy when you're trying to get information about something. And we've begun to realize that part of what we need to do is have members speak up and say, I'm a public employee and my job is to go out in the neighborhood when we get a call about a suspected child abuse situation, and I have to go knock on that door and I have to make an assessment about whether that child should stay with the family, and if not, what should happen. I'm a public employee and I'm the one that has to go to a factory on the outskirts of a town and make a determination about whether what they're doing is going to have an impact on the water quality. I'm a state employee and I'm working in a vet's home taking care of vets who otherwise are basically left on their own. So we're working to get the story out of what are public employees. It's not a question of just 40,000 bureaucrats. It really is an issue of people who provide services, who take their jobs really seriously, and who want to keep doing those jobs but want just a little bit of respect in the process. So the contract battle, as I indicated, started about a year ago. The contract expired last June, and we continued to negotiate with extensions. Then in November, the governor did something that was really unprecedented and not something that's ever been done by either a Republican governor or a Democratic governor, which is to say he terminated the contract. We have, however, continued to have a couple of negotiating sessions. We are really struggling to get the governor to understand that for our members, they went into this with very low expectations. They understand what the situation is with the state budget, but they also understand what their situation is with their own families, with the communities that they live in, with the churches that they go to, and the kinds of cutbacks that the governor is proposing would really have a significant impact. So one of the things the governor is proposing, in addition to across-the-board pay freeze, would be to change significantly how people pay for their health insurance. And the bottom line is that it would result in people paying about $10,000 more over the course of the contract. And that's just assuming that you don't have any major medical emergencies. That's just business as usual. You're going to be paying $10,000 more. That's a pretty hefty kick in the gut, frankly, and people are very concerned about what that will mean. So we've pushed, we've tried to see a little movement on the part of the governor. So far, we have not seen any movement, and there is more and more discussion about what to do if we get to a situation where there's just no movement whatsoever and the governor wants to impose their last best offer, and that would mean going to a strike. Now, that's not anything that members take on lightly. I think they understand very well how significant that would be, and so we've been in the process of a very careful one-on-one process so that literally every single member will be given the opportunity to sit down with someone who's connected to the local union to talk about what their concerns are, what their main issues are with respect to the contract, how they would feel about going out on strike. We've just recently developed some recommendations, because we don't have a strike fund, some recommendations on ways that people can kind of prepare financially. So at this point, where we are is that we are seeing no movement whatsoever on the part of the governor, and our members are increasingly taking steps to prepare for a strike if that's what's required. So the final thing that I want to do is just talk a little bit about the kind of community support that we're hoping to get, because it clearly makes a tremendous difference if there's a sense that people outside of the union, people who are not public employees, recognize the value of the work they do and respect what they do. So the community
support piece is often very much about communicating to the public employees, but it's also a larger effort to make it clear that it's not a world dominated by the Tribune's vision of government shrunk down to nothing. And to do that, we really want to engage all of our friends in this process. I have some materials here. We're going to be doing some blitzing of putting signs in windows of businesses that are located near some of the large state facilities in Chicago. And I would just urge you to take some of this information, take it back to other organizations you may belong to. We have sample resolutions, we have petitions, and any support that you can provide us would be very much appreciated.
John will be